Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's Great Plains Midwest Climate Outlook for this 20th day of November 2014. And briefing us today from the cold that we've all experienced is Dr. Dennis Toddy, who is the South Dakota State climatologist at South Dakota State University. And we will keep everybody on mute until the end of the presentation. And at that time, we will unmute everyone's line, and you can ask questions at that point. So thank you, everyone, for being here again. And Dennis, it's all yours.
Great. Thank you, John. Yes, it is a good cold afternoon to about everyone who's probably listening on here. So my apologies for the cold. I guess I can take the blame for it, but I accept no responsibility for it. We're gonna talk several things cold related today, ag related, and then hit on the outlooks for what's happening. Just showing you a picture here from Waubay, South Dakota, courtesy of the National Weather Service in Aberdeen. A scene that we have seen several times here in the Northern Plains with snow blowing around. Just a reminder of let's do it this way. There we go. Just a reminder that this is a collaboration activity among several state climatologists, regional climate centers, USDA, NOAA, Corps of Engineers, and other partners in providing regional climate services. Our next climate webinar is the 18th of November, the third Thursday again at 1 p.m. Wendy Ryan from the Colorado State Climate Office will be our presenter. And just a reminder that you do have access to these archived presentations if you wish to use them and share them around. So, and I would love to be able to ask questions as we go along. Unfortunately, just the way this is structured, please do keep note of them, and we'll address them at the end. We do have several partners on board with us today who will be here from Kevin Grody from the Army Corps of Engineers, Kevin Lau from the Missouri River Forecast Center, as well as Doug Cluck and John Ice. So again, just kind of our current conditions, impacts, and our outlooks. This is also another scene that still exists across the upper Midwest, harvesting now on top of snow. And in fact, snow has limited our harvest capability in certain places, and we'll talk about that as we go along. So yes, the cold over the last couple of weeks really is driving a big part of the issue right now. It was a very big shift from what we saw throughout much of the fall, where we saw warmer than average conditions. We'll talk about that here in just a second. So it was a very marked contrast, and also has been very cold. This is a departure from average temperature over the last 2 weeks, and you can see all throughout the the central part of the country, 9 to 12 degrees, and more than 15 degrees below average up in the western Dakotas, up into Montana and Wyoming. A 15 to 20 degree day below average is not that unheard of, but to have 2 weeks of it is rather astounding. So showing you where the cold has been, but you can see it has largely missed the Southwest and really was concentrated in that Northern Plains area. It's gone through the whole central part of the country, but the Northern Plains, especially along the front edge of the Rockies, seem to catch the coldest part of this air overall. One other thing that has shown up because of this, I threw this in for fun, buffaloes capturing all the interest now because of lake effect snows. This was put out by Sims at the University of Washington, or University of Wisconsin, showing this is South Dakota, and right along the Missouri River, we were actually getting a little bit of lake effect snow along the Missouri River. It is not nearly as apparent as you get along the Great Lakes, but it is kind of interesting just for the fun of it. A number of different records we've set because of this cold. This is from the Sioux Falls Weather Service office, where Sioux City, Iowa, and Sioux Falls, South Dakota, ended up having their fourth longest period of consecutive hours below freezing for November. Being below freezing is not that big a deal up in this area, but being that many hours in November is a bit surprising. Record lows. This is a new product from the National Climatic Data Center. These are locations with record lows, and this is not quite all of them. You can only show up to 1,000, and this period of time from the 12th to 16th of November, 1,166 record lows set throughout the northwest to southeast part of the country. not as many in the northeast and the southwest, but a large number of these setting low temperature records for those days. So lots of ways we can slice and dice this, looking at different records. Many locations having the 10th to 15th coldest starts in November. Similar years recently would be maybe 1985 and 2000 would be comparable years. I mentioned the hours below freezing in November. From the 11th to the 18th of November, nearly 3,000 record low maximum temperatures. It's an odd record, but it's the lowest high temperature for that day. Nearly 2,000 record low minimums, over 700 snow records, and 300 daily precipitation records. So lots of different ways of looking at this. A pretty astounding event overall, and is driving some of the impacts we'll talk about here in just a little bit. This, again, as I mentioned, comes in very stark contrast compared to what we saw during November. These are statewide average temperature ranks for the month of October, and there are 120 years of record available here, and these are where they rank on the warmth scale. So most of the Midwest came in the near average perspective from October, but you see the Plain States and the Western Plain States fall into the above average to much above average locations. South Dakota and Nebraska being the 101st warmest on record. Get out to Colorado and Wyoming, 115th and 112th. So very, very warm, very, very warm situation overall. From an ag perspective, that was particularly good because it helped to push corn, particularly to maturity, and help it to dry down. But then it was a kind of a shift from when we went into the cold here in November. From a precipitation standpoint, again, a couple different stories here. October precipitation, the greener it is and the higher the number, the wettest it is on record. You see Kentucky, Tennessee, and Missouri in the 100 and teens, near record wettest, 106th in Illinois, 100 in Michigan. But you see the Northern Plains falling in the lowest third or quarter, actually, as this case may be, of driest Octobers on record. And Nebraska, Colorado kind of being in a difference, kind of in the middle ground there. So wetter to the east and especially south, drier to the north and west, and outside the area, but of interest, Nevada and Utah, fifth driest Octobers on record. If we look back for the year as a whole, this still is kind of interesting on how this looks as a year as a whole, and again lays out the main pattern we've been seeing regularly here. These are January through October, again, rankings by state, and the lower the number, the colder it is. So you can see throughout a good chunk of the middle part of the Midwest, top 10 coldest years to this point on record. Then Minnesota, the Dakotas, below average, but not quite as high on the ranking scale, but very warm off to our west. So again, the pattern we've been seeing on a regular basis, ridge of high pressure, with a trough over the middle part of the country, keeping the west very warm and allowing cooler air to pass through the middle part of the country on a regular basis. Florida and the northeastern part of the U.S. were kind of on the opposite side too, staying on the warmer side. Okay, zoom in a little bit and look in a little more detail at some of the situations here. 90-day precipitation totals in the upper left-hand side here. So here's Iowa in the middle, Minnesota, South Dakota, Nebraska, Kansas, Missouri. Scale is on the bottom here. The bluer and purple, more purple, the more precipitation there was. See some heavier precipitation in the last 90 days. This is from the end of end of August on in northern Michigan areas, parts of the I states, Iowa to Indiana, and some of Missouri, where we've had, in the upper teens to maybe 20 inches of precipitation during that time period. Plains, this is a bit drier time of year, but still amounts over here amounting to less than 2 inches, or in some places even less than an inch of precipitation during that time. We put that on a percent of normal basis to give you a little perspective. The green areas are above average in the way of, maybe 3 to 6, or parts of Iowa more than 9 inches above average. The far eastern Corn Belt a little drier than average. That area from northern Minnesota down to the eastern Dakotas and parts of Nebraska has been below average during this time too. Keep that area in mind as we get to the U.S. Drought Monitor looking up ahead. If we look at this on an even shorter time frame, looking the last 30 days, going from 90 days to 30 days, So looking from the latter part of October into November, total precipitation now falls off even more. This, again, continues to be a drier time of year, but even from a percent, we're going to a percent of normal now, percent of average. You can see lots of red, so well below average precipitation for this time of year. Only a few places from Colorado up through South Dakota into the UP of Michigan were above average. Large areas of Kansas, Nebraska, over into Iowa, Illinois, Wisconsin, less than 25% of average at this time. Again, this was a positive situation for most of the harvest because we had lots of corn this year, although a very good growing season. The lack of really hot temperatures, corn was being slow to develop this year, so the additional heat and dryness during the fall helped to mature some of the corn crop and make it more able to be harvested. We'll talk about that more here in just a second. From a temperature standpoint, 30-day temperature in the left-hand side, upper left-hand side, and departure from normal temperature. So this includes not only the recent cold, but the warmth before. So the last 30 days were somewhat below normal over most of the region, 4 to 6 degrees below average in the southeastern part of the region. The only place above average over this time frame still would be western Colorado and on down to the southwest. Snow cover, odd thing to be talking about in the third week of November. For having not having snow at this time of year is not astounding, but having decent snowpacks at this time of year is interesting. Mentioned Buffalo earlier with some of the lake effect snows. You can see lake effect snows already having occurred in the UP of Michigan, where there looks like they're 16 to 20 inches or more of depth of snow along that area. A swath of 4 to 8 inches plus of snow from the western Dakotas through central Minnesota on in northern Wisconsin and the UP. A little bit of snow in the eastern Corn Belt also, even down in Iowa, though not quite as much down in that area. So a couple storm systems have dropped decent snowfalls up in this area, and some of the lake effect snows adding to it right along the lake there. If we put this on a comparison to average, or how we compare to average or the anomaly, the scale over here, obviously the bluer it is, the more it is above average, and the only places, and then the yellows to reds are ones that are below average. You see only a very few places are below average, a couple in North Dakota, and then some of the higher elevation areas out here in Montana and Wyoming. We'll talk about that in a little bit. So typically we're not carrying any snowpack this time of year on average, 16 to 20 inches plus above snowpack, average snowpack as we look through the region. We'll have to keep an eye on this as we go through the winter. Not a ton of moisture associated with this right now, but if we're not able to melt this off, we could have the start of a decent snowpack depending on what happens for the rest of the winter. What this has done also with the cold, and I don't have this from a map perspective, we do have frozen soils already, probably in Minnesota, eastern Dakotas, probably even parts of Iowa now. The drier soils have frozen a little more quickly than do wet soils. So even with the snowpack, we're seeing some freezing up of soils already. Some issues related to the cold. We're going to talk a bit just about ice jams on some of the rivers out west because of the cold. The Mississippi River is being closed, I believe, today. That is the earliest on record. That record only goes back to 1969, but it is the earliest. It's not a major issue at this point, and it typically closes December 1, I think they mentioned, but it is closing earliest because of ice starting to build up in the locks and dams on the upper Mississippi. Also starting to get some early ice-ins in lakes in Minnesota, in Illinois. Jim Angel pointing out that they're getting some freezing there, and starting to get some on Superior already. Now, this is not big ice accumulation, but starting to accumulate ice already is somewhat early at this point in the year. I mentioned from the snowpack perspective what's looking like out in the western part of the country and what's happening. This is particularly impactful for us in the way of filling up of reservoirs and runoff when we come around to the springtime. The slide on the right is the current SWE snow water equivalent from the SNOTEL stations. Basically the same scale. Yellows to reds are on a percentile basis, and then on the lower or left-hand side, the snow water equivalent by basin, following that same color scheme. The brighter the color is, the golden to reds, you're getting down to 50 to 60% of normal or below 50% of normal. And most of the basins that feed the Missouri River here in Montana and Wyoming, except for this would be the Belle Fourche Reservoir, the Belle Fourche area, are all below average. Now, this is very early in the year. There's the biggest part of the accumulation season is much later, so this is not a major issue, but it is something worth starting to watch at this point. Some an impact on the Missouri River Basin. I'll turn it over to Kevin Lau to speak here for just a second. Go ahead, Kevin.
Okay, thank you, Dennis. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, great. Yeah, I just wanted to briefly mention this is usually a downtime for the River Center, but we do have some activity, and it's in regard to ice, as Dr. Toddy mentioned, with that Arctic blast that we had in early to mid-November. We've already started to see some ice problems. Right now we're looking at the Jefferson River in southwest Montana. Has about a 4 or 5 mile long ice jam. It's not causing any flooding right now, but if it continues to build, then the locals do have some concerns right now. And then also the lower reaches of the North and South Platte River above the confluence. There's ice jams on both of those, and that is having some very minor flooding along the North Platte Reach. The graph in the lower right of this slide shows something that we call accumulated freezing degree days, and basically this is just showing the little red line that's just beginning to start at the lower left there. That's this current year, and the other 4 lines are the past 4 years. And so we're well ahead of schedule as far as accumulating these freezing degree days, and that has a direct correlation with ice thickness and ice jamming. So we're ahead of the game here, and we'll continue to expect jamming to be a concern for the remainder of this winter, especially with the higher than average stream flows prior to freeze-in. I think we do stand a better chance of seeing ice jams this winter. And that's all I really wanted to say, Dennis.
All right, thanks, Kevin. Also, just a reminder to people, we have Kevin Grody from the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers Omaha office on for any questions or comments near the end. I didn't include any slides specifically, but if there are questions need to be addressed, the Corps, Kevin Grody will be able to deal with those at the end. I did not include a soil moisture map because we're still trying to assess. Again, we don't have good soil moisture monitoring. We've got some models that sometimes are pretty good, other times are a little questionable. So I didn't include a map, but we do have certain things we can say about soil moisture throughout the region. I mentioned the lack of precipitation in eastern Dakotas and Minnesota. That's showing up with dry soils in those areas. I even had reports of people stopping tillage in parts of northeast South Dakota because it was starting to do damage to equipment. It was so dry. We're still getting excess. We still have excess soil moisture in parts of Minnesota, Wisconsin, Illinois, and maybe Iowa. These are based on NASS crop reports where people are still reporting being unable to get into fields and get crop out. Also, probably Montana, Wyoming, and the western Dakotas are somewhat wetter in the way of soil moisture due to some heavier fall and precipitation. Really, and again, I didn't show the model because I'm not sure it's handling it very well given the cool summer. Basically, I think the deeper soil moisture was not extracted from places where we do have some soil moisture monitoring. The deeper soil profile was not extracted because of the very cool summer. But several places were having shallower depths that are drier. We did also have reports from much of the upper Mississippi Basin on an area basis that stream flows seem to be reacting to some drier soils there overall. So it's a bit hit and miss, but that's kind of what we know at this point. Okay, let's hit on some of the ag issues. Several general issues. The extreme temperature switch has caused some livestock stress, where we had livestock reacting to the warmer conditions earlier. had not had coats on them yet to be able to handle the cold. Reports out of Minnesota there was some respiratory stress because of the extreme cold shift. There was oftentimes livestock are put out into cornfields to eat in some of the remnants of the cornfield for a while. The snow has forced them to move out in some cases. The cold has also slowed some harvest progress, especially in the snow-covered areas. As I mentioned, still too wet to harvest in a few certain places. Illinois, Michigan, Wisconsin are specifically noted in the weekly crop reports. Maybe Ohio, kind of reading between the lines. And then Michigan, Minnesota, and Wisconsin, we have harvest or fields that were yet to be harvested that are now snowed in. People were leaving them in the field for a variety of reasons to try to dry down more, and the early snow has caught up with them. Places, again, too dry for fall tillage. And then there was also, interesting, a September frost, a comment from September frost that we had cold temperatures that in parts of the Dakotas and Minnesota that did not reach freezing, but they were in the low to mid 30s. Didn't fall below freezing, but I'm getting reports from places in low-lying spots that there were some wider spread freezing occurred in low-lying areas where we must have some cold air drainage and some yield loss. In the larger perspective, I don't think the yield loss is going to be huge, but for those producers, it will be somewhat significant, I think, because of yield loss related to them. From an overall harvest perspective, from a national basis, corn is 89% harvested, soybeans 94%, sorghum 83%, sunflowers 80%, falling behind a little bit. Sorghum and sunflowers are more western types of crops, corn and soybean most of the east. There was a delayed harvest, particularly on corn, partially because, as I mentioned, the cool summer crop moisture was too high. They were allowing it to dry down in the field. And with lower crop prices this year, they didn't want to expend money on artificial drying. Some places there was a lack of storage, and again, the drying cost and the low crop price. In the end result is going to be some crop is going to end up being left in the field. Anecdotally, I've heard from producers who have been relatively pleased with what they harvested out of those in several years where they've not been able to get it out. So instead of trying to dry it or finding storage for it, they're going to leave it in the field and take their chances with it. Some images from the USDA World Agricultural Outlook Board. This is corn percent harvested, and you can see our states that are struggling a bit, particularly 64% only harvested in Wisconsin as of Monday, 59% in Michigan, and those areas, again, did have snow in them. The corn is probably further south, but there's still going to be some problems there. Indiana only 84%, Ohio 81%, though that's a little bit ahead of average right now. The western states, good portions of them harvested this time of year, but still decent amounts sitting out in the field. Soybean harvest largely finished up. Still a few areas, a little bit of soybean harvest. People do not want to leave soybeans in the field very long. There's a much greater opportunity to lose yield because beans, the pods shatter and beans fall on the ground and are unharvestable. Winter wheat may be our other issue that we're dealing with some problems with because of the cold. This is the percent of winter wheat emerged as of Monday. Less of the winter wheat emerged in the eastern part of the Corn Belt. Not a ton of winter wheat grown here, but some, largely because they were probably delayed getting harvesting before they were able to get back in the field. Much of the winter wheat had emerged out in this area, so it was in pretty good shape. But there have been some concerns with the extreme cold has probably stopped that growth of winter wheat throughout most of the region. It's been cold enough to freeze it off. Questioning how much damage has been done by the extreme cold. Soil temperatures were not too cold yet, so there may be some problem. Also saw reports of frost heaving in some areas, maybe causing some issues. Also, some drought issues continuing in the southern areas may be impacting some of the winter wheat issues with dryness. Speaking of that drought, here's the most recent U.S. Drought Monitor released this morning. Again, white areas are no drought issues. D0 yellow is abnormally dry, and then D1 to D4 issues. From a U.S. basis, the far southern plains, still some ongoing long-term drought issues and the obvious issues we know in California. Throughout our area, We still have Kansas, parts of Kansas, and Colorado in those D1 to D2 areas with a very long-term drought. We've seen some improvement. I guess there's even a little bit of D3 in far southwestern Kansas here. A little spot of D0 on the Ohio-Michigan border, and then that large area in the eastern Dakotas and Minnesota that we reported as being dry over the last 90 days, even a little bit of spot of D1 moderate drought in the longer-term dryness issues in far northeastern South Dakota, far southeastern North Dakota. Okay, kind of moves through the impact and current conditions, so we're going to hit on what we can say from a forecast, looking ahead on the outlook. This is another NOAA product from the Hydrologic Prediction Center, predicted precipitation over the next 7 days. Most of the chances for better precipitation are in the eastern part of the region, where you could have possibly an inch or more of precipitation. I don't know how good this is overall, but gives you an indication of the overall precipitation areas. Northern Plains, less of a chance by this time of year. Climatologically, we don't have much chances for precipitation. Plus, cold northwest flow does not bring large amounts of precipitation overall. Going ahead to the 8 to 14 day outlook, this was released yesterday. The new one will be released here within the next hour or two. For the end of November, blue areas indicate increased chances for below average temperatures, staying with us throughout the southeastern part of the country. Not as strong a likelihood and probably not as cold as we have been overall, but still below average. The southwestern part of the U.S. staying warmer. Most of the region either normal to below normal chances for precipitation. As we look ahead beyond that, we've got to talk a little bit about El Nino and La Nina. Remember, our area we're talking about with El Nino is the equatorial Pacific, the eastern part of the equatorial Pacific. And our update here is just kind of a quick El Nino status. Here's that area of the Pacific that we're talking about, showing a loop of sea surface temperature anomalies, indicating that we are seeing some warming of the water in that area that would be indicative of El Nino. These are the sea surface temperature anomalies over time for the different El Nino regions. You see most of them are increasing their warm anomalies. So we would be expecting some impact of El Nino as we go along. And the NOAA the Climate Prediction Center is saying officially 58 to 60% probability of getting into an El Nino this winter. But at this point, the El Nino is seeming to start up, but it looks like it's going to stay on the weak side. The atmospheric reaction has not been quite what was expected and what we would expect to see out of that. Therefore, the impact of El Nino we expect to be, especially up in our area, largely not there or only minorly there, and that is reflected in some of the outlooks. The Climate Prediction Center did pick and choose parts of what they expect to see with El Nino, and there was a change in some of that going on. So right now we're still considered ENSO neutral. We are getting very close. I wouldn't be surprised we go into officially into El Nino conditions relatively soon, but again, it's going to stay probably very weak. Officially, a chance at about 58%. Weak El Nino is the most likely outcome, and parts of El Nino impacts were incorporated in the winter outlooks. We'll show those as we go along here. So, December temperature and precipitation probabilities. December was a bit of a change from last time. It backed off on much chance for warm throughout our region. The only places that are non-EC equal chances are the central to southern plains, which have an increased chances for below average temperatures, and the far eastern part of our region, Ohio, Michigan, which has a slightly increased chances for above average over there. From a precipitation side, almost all the areas EC. The Climate Prediction Center is expecting more of an active southern stream this year with a more active storm track in the southern to southeastern part of the country. Good for the south central U.S. from a drought recovery standpoint. You see also potential for California recovery, but really saying not much one way or the other for us. As we jump ahead to the December through February outlook, you see some similarities here, but the change over much of our area has backed off on chances for warmth, and only a small chance for warmth in the far western areas. Increased our chances for below average temperatures in the far southern part. Not a big change here, but a small percentage one. From a precipitation standpoint, The dry area over the Great Lakes and the Ohio Valley, that is more indicative of an El Nino condition, and Climate Prediction Center has been steady with holding that in despite the weak El Nino condition. So we'll see how that plays out, but that has been reflected with the drier there and continuing wetter than average, more likely in the far southern U.S. Now, I want to compare, because this was a bit of a change. This is the outlook from last month, and I'm going to go back and forth a couple times so you see the contrast. You see the contrast is probably biggest in the way of temperatures over us. If we back up, you see that area of warmer than average over the northern part of the region has been removed, and they've increased the below average chances to the south. We'll bop back and forth here. That is a big area change, but from a percentage change, it's really not, because the likelihood last time was really fairly small still of the above average chances for temperature. So they've really not changed a great deal overall. The precipitation one, you see that they've largely stayed, they've changed the area coverage slightly, but they've stayed pretty steady with that one from last month's outlook to this month. So just kind of a thing to point out there, that while it looks like a big change from a temperature standpoint on a percentage basis, it's not a major change overall. There were some questions about what we could say for spring going on. So these are the CPC outlooks for March through May. Temperatures over the whole region going EC right now, don't have enough to lean one way or the other at this point. From the precipitation side, still holding on to that dry area in the over the Great Lakes area. But there is an interesting contrast. I want to contrast the precipitation outlooks. On the left is the February, March, April outlook, and on the right it's March, April, May. So we're offset by just a month here, and there is a bit of a contrast, but the late winter, early spring is hinting at potentially a little wetter in the central to southern plain. This is very much an El Nino signal. They're holding on to in the way of precipitation, and then the dryness over here. So we'll have to keep an eye on this as we go along. Again, this part of the El Nino outlooks, they are holding on to and putting that in there. All these different pieces and probabilities are incorporated in the seasonal drought outlook. Again, this is indicating areas of D1 or worse, and saying whether it will remain, it will persist, if it will improve, or if there are areas that are expected to come about. Our D1 area in the northern plains likely to stay with us. That the higher level D2, D3 in the southern plains, really this is not much of a time of year for big improvement. So this outlook is holding on to that right now. Though further south in that wetter area, they're showing chances for improvement. And over here in Michigan, the dry area, over the strongest part of the dry area, indicated as likely, they're showing drought development likely in part of eastern Michigan. So that is an area we'll want to keep an eye on too. Okay, to summarize, recent conditions, a very warm early part of the fall gave way to cold very quickly over the last 2 weeks, set a number of records for temperatures and precipitation. Dry conditions in the northern plains, eastern Dakotas, Minnesota, wet in the western, northern plains, kind of a mixed bag over to the east based on where you had some heavier precipitation or not. Harvest generally proceeded pretty well given where we were going into harvest. Most people were fairly pleased. Probably some disappointment in the Wisconsin, Minnesota, Michigan area where crops were not able to be pulled out just yet. And then also some concern of damage to winter wheat with the rapid shift from warm conditions to cold conditions. Winter wheat does not like freezing conditions and very, very cold conditions. It needs to vernalize a bit. It also likes to have some snow cover on it. So we'll have to keep an eye on what the total damage was to snow. In deference to, I did get a comment from Mary Knapp in Kansas where they do grow some cotton. They said the cold was actually may have been a benefit to the cotton growers in Kansas. From an outlook summary standpoint, chance of El Nino 50%, 58% into winter. Pieces of this have been included in the outlooks. Other parts have not. The overall impact of El Nino, I think, is going to be less than we expected it to be. and there could be other impacts, larger ones that we're not able to gauge at this point, that would overcome any chance or El Nino possibilities. The outlook's indicating drier likely over the Great Lakes, a fairly decent chance of that. Not much elsewhere until late winter, where we get some of the potential for wetness in the central southern plains. Cooler temperatures are more likely the further south you are in the basin, in the region. Equal chances elsewhere. And then just some kind of a comment based on some things we have seen recently. You know, what does November cold mean from a persistence basis? A number of state climatologists looked in this, and really statistically, November cold doesn't say too much about this for the rest of the winter, for good or for bad, depending on how you want to look at it. Okay, just a reminder of our partners, a number of the various links where the past presentations are, access to some of the data that's available on here, and our state climatologists. So at this point, I will open it up to questions. Whatever questions, comments people have, something I've missed, I didn't explain well enough, I will take or work with some of our partners. John?
Okay, thank you, Dennis, and I will open the lines now. And I know we had some questions that came in while you were speaking, and let me open up the lines here. Okay, if you have a question, go ahead and just speak up.
Hi, this is Benjamin Diamond.
Hi, Benjamin. How you doing?
Good, thank you. I had a few questions. First, could you be more specific about where there were winter wheat issues, like which states?
Well, any place there's winter wheat grown, there are potential for issues. We've been examining that in South Dakota. The assessment from our crops people was it was still too early to tell how much that would be. We examined it down in Kansas, and they weren't sure. They didn't think there would be too much of a problem down there. But it's a potential problem anywhere where winter wheat is grown, just because of the extreme shift of the cold.
Say, could we have everybody mute their line if you're not talking? That would be very helpful. We're getting a lot of background noise from conversations in the background. Thank you.
Yeah. And just to let you know is when you are talking, we can all hear what you're talking about. Thank you.
Yeah, Benjamin, do you have another question?
Yeah, about El Nino, the probability being 58%. Do you explain what that means? With the probability?
Basically, I'm not sure exactly what CPC, Climate Prediction Center, is basing the probability on, but it's a probabilistic forecast on reaching El Nino conditions. So it's not a 50-50. It's leaning one way. It's slightly more likely that we will get into El Nino conditions. But what we're also trying to say is, even if we do get into El Nino conditions, it's going to be relatively weak. Therefore, we do not expect to have a typical El Nino winter throughout most of our region.
Dennis, can I jump in? This is Ken.
Yeah.
It's never 50-50 because there's three categories. So there's neutral, there's La Nina, and El Nino. So 33% would mean that would be I guess, what you're comparing it against. So 50-something is more than 20% above random chance. So it's 33%
Ken, we're talking about El Nino as opposed to the actual rainfall.
No, I know. I'm just referring when Dennis said it's a 50-50. On that El Nino forecast, there's the three categories, so it can't be 50-50.
Yes. I pulled that up now. If you look at the slide, what that's based on is this is actually a slide that comes from the IRI, International Research Institute at Columbia University, that breaks it down into the three categories of it being red as El Nino, the green is neutral conditions, and blue is probability of being in La Nina. So still the most likely outcome is El Nino in the upper 50s, you see.
Yep.
The 40, just a little bit more than 40% chance of being neutral, and an extremely small percentage, but still possible, of La Nina conditions occurring and we're saying here the December, January, February time frame.
Yeah. And the other thing to remember is that the way El Nino is defined, or La Nina for that matter, is that a certain length of it can't just reach El Nino for one day and we call it, we have an El Nino now. It's over a fairly long period of time, months, like 5 months, that we have to sustain above a certain threshold of temperature, more or less, in the ocean for it to be called officially an El Nino. That does not mean we cannot have some effect of El Nino-like, if you will, atmospheric reaction to that across North America. It doesn't mean it's not going to happen. The fact that it's fairly weak usually means, or tends to mean, that it's much less predictable. How about that?
Okay.
I don't know. I'm not sure if that helps or not.
Yeah.
Actually, that's more confusing.
Yeah.
Well,
sorry.
This is John at the.
I think that was pretty well explained myself. This is Bryce Anderson, saying that conditions, or these above normal precipitation amounts that were referenced for the Jan Feb time period, December through February, and then kind of tailing off into spring. That I believe would be kind of the period when El Nino would be most recognized, and it looked to me like the forecast was presenting that accordingly, but maybe that's just my opinion.
Yeah, and if we didn't look at it from the longer term perspective, the sea surface temperature anomalies right now are, between 0.5 and 1 degree C, which would classify as El Nino category, but they have not been sustained for that long enough period of time. Okay, Benjamin, does that kind of address it, or?
Yeah. I also had a question about the impact on agriculture for a typical El Nino.
Okay. Are you talking about over the whole basin or a particular part of the basin?
The whole basin.
Okay. Or excuse me, the whole region.
Yeah.
Typically, El Nino peaks in the wintertime. So therefore, the overall impact on agriculture during the winter is relatively small. There are some carryover impacts, and if you get El Nino that does carry over into the growing season, there are some impacts that would occur in that El Ninos during the summer have a tendency to be less potential for very warm conditions and less potential to be very dry. They may not be wet, they may not be cool, but they tend to be lower stress kinds of years and tend to be generally better yielding years if you're talking about most of the corn belt.
Okay.
Can I jump in with a question, please?
Sure. Bryce.
Yes, good afternoon. This is Bryce Anderson with DTN. Dennis, regarding the drier pattern that you talked about in October in the northern plains and part of the upper Midwest there, is there anything that has gone on that gives you any thought about how the growing season in 2015 might act?
Well, it's been an odd discussion about those dry conditions because, as I mentioned, the dry was really very good from a harvest standpoint. That carryover dryness in the soil could be a benefit to those areas because those areas in the eastern Dakotas and central and northern Minnesota tend to be areas that are wetter and cooler in the spring. The soils don't warm up as quickly. So again, there could be, based on how much precipitation we get this winter and early spring, which there's still enough question about that, there could be a positive impact for people getting into fields and planting earlier, or at least planting in reasonable situations in that area. That then depends on getting enough precipitation as you get into the latter part of spring and summer. So there's a little bit of a balancing act there, but it again could end up being a little bit beneficial for them.
Okay. Any more? Any farther into the season, or is that kind of a little bit out there right now?
I wish I could give people a better assessment of what the next growing season is going to be like, but without El Nino to work with, without soil moisture anomalies to work with, the dynamic models aren't giving me much to work with. So for the next growing season, I'm still it's a to be determined at this point.
Greg Schuler with an El Nino comment.
Sure, go ahead, Greg.
Our predictions have been showing a late and weak El Nino into May, actually, and has probably clearer implications for and the path to May may have clear implications for South American crop rather than U.S.
Okay, thank you, Greg. Other questions?
Hello?
Hello?
Go ahead.
Hi, Paul Lepistow in Pierce, South Dakota calling. Dennis, with the weakening El Nino forming, any idea from you or from people from the Corps on what that might do to snowpack in the mountains? El Nino, from your past webinars, usually leads to less snow in the upper Rockies. What does a weakening El Nino mean? More snow or average, or any thoughts?
Right now, we are assessing this as a weak El Nino, so some of the impacts are being kept there. If you look, let me zip ahead here to there's the December through February outlook. You see that Climate Prediction Center is keeping a little bit of that below average precipitation area in western Montana there. Again, it's not a big precipitation probability change, but it is a little bit just to be aware of. Early on, and again, we're very early in this snow season. We're really not seeing very much accumulation, even with some of those storms we've heard here recently. But we're still too early to say too much about that. Corps folks, do you want to weigh in on this at all?
Can you hear me?
Yeah, go ahead, Kevin.
This is Kevin Grody from the Corps in Omaha. How you doing, Paul? As Dennis said, it is really early in the season for us to be making any projections as far as what we're going to be peaking at with mountain snowpack. Over the last 5 years or so, we've seen, in some of the big years, some pretty good accumulation during March and April. So, right now we're below average, but the amount that we see in November and December is far less than what we see in, say, the February, March, and April months. So we will monitor this and try to keep the basin updated with what we're going on. That's it. Thank you.
And Paul, the other thing to throw onto that is I noted, some of the soil moisture that Montana and the eastern Dakota did have above average precipitation this fall. So the soils there are somewhat wetter and probably would be a little more effective at producing some runoff come spring, pending on the amount of precipitation. So there might be a little bit of a balancing impact there if the mountain snowpack is a little bit below average. Any other questions?
Yeah, this is Nancy Garter in Omaha.
Hi, Nancy.
I wonder if the Corps could run through again their discussion about the potential for ice jams. Is it particularly anywhere? Or did you have an area where you thought you were going to watch it most? And then could you run through again why a higher stream flow would contribute to ice jams? Thank you. That's it.
Hi, Nancy. This is Kevin Grody, and I think you're actually looking for the other Kevin from the National Weather Service, Kevin Lau.
Hi, yeah, this is Kevin. I don't quite understand the hydraulics behind why a higher stream level would lead to flood potential. But I mean, that's just what kind of a rule of thumb that we have, but I'm not sure why that would be. Kevin Grody, do you have can you help me out on that one?
What was the question again, Kevin?
Well, higher stream levels normally or typically lead to higher ice jam potential. That's just something that we kind of keep in our hip pocket around here. Yes. But I don't really know what the dynamics behind that is.
I just think you have more water to freeze, and the impacts of frozen streams with water flowing behind it is going to lead to flooding.
Yeah, you're right. The impacts are made manifest.
Are more severe.
Right. But so I'm sorry, I don't know what the driving force behind the actual jam up is.
That's okay. Yeah. But how about then? Is there a part of the Missouri River Basin? I'm thinking, the Platte has some freezing on it right now. Is there part of the Missouri River Basin that you're most concerned about? Dakotas?
Well, there are certain areas that usually jam up every year, and I don't have off the top of my head, I don't have a list of those. But I would suspect that the locations that normally jam up will again see jamming this season.
Okay, that works. Thank you very much.
Sorry I couldn't be of more help.
No, that's helpful. Thank you.
Hey, this
is Elizabeth Wakeman. I have a question.
Go ahead.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, Dennis, are you there?
Yes, I am. Go ahead.
All right, Dennis, I want you to give me a call later on. I have some business with you.
All right, we'll take care of that.
All right.
Bryce, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks. Bryce Anderson again. Dennis, could I ask just for a comment from your perspective on how much, if any, improvement we might see in that far west drought pattern over the next few months if a weak El Nino does develop, along with that Texas Panhandle area? Got any thoughts on that?
Of the two, I would probably think Texas has a better chance of seeing some improvement than California does. You noted that California both of those were in the areas with above average chances for precipitation. And, well, here, we'll leave the seasonal drought outlook, but there's going to be some...
I know what that says. I was wondering kind of basically if you agreed with that or if you had maybe a little bit different opinion.
Given that we've seen some improvement in Texas already, helping to move that improvement along, I think has a better opportunity. I know I've seen some of the things coming out of California, and I would agree with that even if they had a really great year out there, they are in such a big hole that even a great year would still leave them in a decent hole. So it really depends on how they need an outstanding water year no matter what, and I don't think the probability is outstanding on getting a really good water year, but I think things will improve slightly anyway.
Okay. Thank you.
Outstanding questions. Any last ones before we wrap up for the day?
Okay, well, thank you, Dennis, again for a fine presentation today and for all of our panelists. And thank you all for attending and with your great questions. We do appreciate them, and it's always good to get challenged a little bit. Anyway, take care now, and we'll see you next time on December 18th. Bye-bye now.